What happens when Meghan Markle, the most media-savvy royal of the modern era, sits across from Howard Stern, a man famous for asking what no one else dares? No handlers, no pre-approved questions, no sympathetic nodding, just microphones, ego, and the raw collision of two people who both believe they control every room they enter. Meghan walks into the Howard Stern show expecting to set the record straight, to finally confront the man who's mocked her media strategy on national radio for years. Howard walks in expecting answers. What neither of them expect is just how fast the interview will spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations ever broadcast live. Within 30 minutes, one of them will be escorted out of the building. The other will be left explaining to millions of listeners what they just witnessed. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure you hit subscribe and smash that like button. Now let's get into exactly what happened in that studio. The Howard Stern Show studio hummed with its usual electric, unpredictable energy. Dim lighting, walls plastered with posters from decades of outrageous interviews, and the unmistakable smell of coffee, equipment, and trouble waiting to happen. Meghan Markle stepped inside like she owned the room. She moved with the deliberate grace of someone who'd been trained to command attention, and expected it as her due. Howard opened with what he thought was a warm-up question. "So, how's life in California? You've been there a while now. Montecito treating you well?" Meghan shrugged with practiced nonchalance. "It's wonderful. We're thriving, building something meaningful away from the chaos." Howard blinked. "Thriving. That word comes up a lot with you. It's almost like a mantra." "It's not a mantra, it's the truth." "Okay, but help me understand. You left the royal family to escape the spotlight, and then you did Oprah, Netflix, a podcast, a book tour, and now my show. Isn't that a little contradictory?" Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. "It's not contradiction. It's control. I share my story on my terms, not theirs." "Sure, but you still want the spotlight. You're here. That says something." "It says I want the truth heard, not distorted by tabloids with agendas." Robin whispered quietly. "Oh, here we go." Howard tapped his pen against the table. "Speaking of truth, how's Harry?" The shift in Meghan's demeanor was immediate. Walls went up so fast you could almost hear them slam. "I'd prefer not to discuss my husband." Howard's eyebrows rose theatrically. "Really? But you've discussed him extensively. The documentary was basically about your relationship. The Oprah interview featured him prominently. Why is he off limits now?" "Because some things should remain private." Howard laughed, a genuine surprised laugh. "Private? Meghan, you've published his family disputes, his therapy sessions, his childhood traumas. Where was private during all of that?" "That was his choice to share. And this is my choice to ask. You don't get to dictate what's discussable on my show. You can decline to answer, but you can't control the questions." Meghan's face flushed slightly. "I'm not trying to control anything." "Aren't you? You arrived with 17 pages of restricted topics. 17. That's not conversation. That's choreography," Robin murmured. "Damn." The tension in the studio was building. Howard remained calm, but his questions were becoming sharper. "Let's try something else. The Spotify situation. That ended dramatically. Grifters, they called you. How did that feel?" Meghan's expression hardened. "I don't engage with inflammatory labels from disgruntled executives." "It wasn't disgruntled. It was the head of the podcasting division. He seemed pretty clear about his assessment." "His assessment was wrong." "Was it? Because from the outside, it looks like you took millions and delivered not much. 12 episodes over 3 years. That's barely content." "Quality matters more than quantity, Howard. Quality requires actual product. What you delivered was sparse. People noticed." Meghan stood up slightly, then sat back down, a false start that betrayed her agitation. "We delivered what we were contracted to deliver. Did you? Because the contract ended early. That usually means someone wasn't satisfied. Our visions didn't align. Your vision of being paid millions while producing almost nothing didn't align with their vision of receiving content for their investment. I can see how that might create tension. The audience listening could practically hear Meghan's composure cracking. You're deliberately mischaracterizing our work. I'm describing observable facts. You signed a major deal. You produced minimal content. The deal ended badly. Those are facts, Meghan, not characterization, documentation. Robin whispered, "This is getting brutal." Howard pressed forward, his tone sharpening. "Let's talk about the Netflix situation. Some of your projects got canceled recently, didn't they? The animated series, some documentary concepts." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "Projects evolve. That's the nature of the entertainment industry." Evolve? The trade specifically used the word canceled. Is there a semantic difference I'm missing? The trades sensationalize everything. They also report facts. And the fact seems to be that several projects you announced with great fanfare are no longer happening. Our focus shifted to other priorities. Which priorities? Because from the outside, it looks like Netflix paid you quite a lot of money for content that hasn't materialized. $100 million, wasn't it? Meghan's voice took on an edge. I'm not going to discuss financial details of private contracts. The contract value was widely reported, as was the, let's call it, underwhelming output relative to that investment. People are curious. People are always curious about things that aren't their business. Howard smiled thinly. You made it their business. You announced these projects publicly. You promoted them. When the content doesn't appear, questions follow. That's not intrusion. That's consequence. Meghan crossed her arms, her posture becoming defensive. Can we talk about something else? Sure. Let's talk about the royal family. How are things with Kate? Meghan exploded before Howard even finished. Don't. The studio froze. Meghan continued, voice controlled but icy. Do not sit here and drag my relationship with Catherine into this for ratings. Howard didn't back down. I wasn't dragging anything. I was asking how things stand between you two. It's a reasonable question given everything you've said publicly. It's not reasonable. It's invasive. You've discussed her in multiple interviews. You've implied things in your documentary. Why is she off limits now when she wasn't before? Because I've learned that anything I say gets twisted. By who? I'm just asking for an update. You made claims about crying, about conflicts. I'm curious if things have improved. Meghan's nostrils flared. My relationship with Catherine is private. Since when? It wasn't private when you were implying she made you cry. It wasn't private when your documentary included footage that seemed designed to create certain impressions. That footage was taken out of context. By your own production company? You produced that documentary. If context was missing, that's on you. Robin inhaled sharply. This is getting scary. Howard leaned back, his patience visibly thinning. All right, let's try something else. You've talked a lot about how you're thriving, how happy you are. But I've been watching you for the last 20 minutes, and you don't seem happy. You seem defensive, guarded, on edge. Is this what thriving looks like? Meghan forced a smile. I'm in an interview being asked challenging questions. No one seems relaxed in that situation. Actually, most people do. Most guests I interview manage to engage with difficult questions without treating them as attacks. You've been combative since you sat down. I've been honest. You've been evasive. Those aren't the same thing. Meghan's voice rose slightly. I disagree with your characterization. Noted, but let me offer an observation. You keep telling me you're happy. You keep insisting you're thriving. But your behavior suggests otherwise. Happy people don't get angry when asked about their lives. Thriving people don't treat every question as hostile. Maybe I'm angry because I'm tired of having my happiness questioned. Or maybe you're angry because the questions reveal something you don't want to acknowledge. And what would that be? That maybe you're not as happy as you claim. That maybe leaving the royal family didn't solve your problems, it just created new ones. That maybe you've traded one set of difficulties for another, and you're not sure it was worth it. Meghan stared at Howard, her expression shifting through several emotions: anger, hurt, something that might have been recognition. You don't know anything about my life. I know what you've told me. And what you've told me, through your words and your behavior, is that you're deeply unhappy, deeply defensive, and deeply convinced that the whole world is your enemy. The world isn't my enemy. Then why do you treat everyone like one? Every question is an attack. Every interviewer is hostile. Every criticism is racism or sexism or some other ism. At some point, you have to wonder if maybe the common factor is you. Meghan stood up abruptly, the movement startling the crew. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. Howard didn't stand. He just looked up at her with an expression of weary resignation. Probably, but not for the reasons you think. What's that supposed to mean? You came here thinking you'd control the conversation. You came here thinking your title and your trauma would shield you from scrutiny. And when they didn't, you fell apart. That's not my fault, Meghan. That's yours. I didn't fall apart. You're standing up, preparing to storm out because I asked you questions. Questions about things you've publicly discussed. What would you call that? I call it refusing to be disrespected. And I call it fragility. The inability to handle anything that doesn't go exactly your way. You don't know me. I know what you've shown me. And what you've shown me is someone who demands empathy while offering none. Someone who wants understanding while refusing to understand. Someone who talks about honesty while getting angry whenever someone is actually honest with her. Meghan pointed at Howard, her hand trembling slightly. You're going to regret this. Howard smiled slightly. Threats now? That's very royal of you. It's not a threat. It's a promise. People will see how I was treated here. They'll see exactly what happened. A host asking questions. A guest refusing to answer them. A confrontation that the guest created and then fled from. Meghan grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with anger. I'm leaving. This interview is over. Howard didn't stand. He remained seated, perfectly calm. The interview was over before it started. You came here to win, not to talk. When winning proved impossible, you decided to leave. That's a pattern, Meghan. It's not a pattern. It's absolutely a pattern. You leave situations you can't control. The palace, the UK, any interview that doesn't go your way. Running away is your signature move. Meghan's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. I don't run away. You're literally walking toward the door. The observation stopped Meghan in her tracks. She stood frozen, caught between her desire to leave and her awareness that leaving would prove Howard's point. I'm choosing not to participate in this ambush. What ambush? I asked you how you're doing. I asked about your projects. I asked about your family. Those are literally the most basic interview questions. If they feel like an ambush, you've been doing the wrong interviews. Your tone. My tone has been curious, occasionally skeptical, largely professional. The same tone I use with every guest. If it feels hostile to you, that's because you came in expecting hostility. You found exactly what you were looking for, because you brought it with you. Meghan moved toward the exit, then turned back for one final confrontation. You know what your problem is, Howard? You think being crude is the same as being honest. You think asking invasive questions makes you brave. But all you really are is a man who's made a career out of making people uncomfortable. Howard nodded slowly. That's partially true. But here's the difference. I make people uncomfortable with questions. You make people uncomfortable with contradictions. I ask things. You avoid things. One of us is doing our job. The other is running from hers. Meghan's voice rose. I'm not running from anything. You're running from everything. From scrutiny, from accountability, from any perspective that doesn't match your own. You've created a bubble where everyone agrees with you, and now you can't handle anyone who doesn't. That's not strength, Meghan. That's fear. I'm not afraid. Then sit down. Engage with my questions. Prove me wrong. Meghan stared at him for a long moment. The challenge hung in the air. She couldn't accept it. She couldn't admit it. She couldn't do anything except what she'd been doing. Deflecting, defending, departing. Goodbye, Howard. Goodbye, Meghan. Thanks for confirming everything I've ever said about you. She turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, she paused. You're pathetic. This whole show is pathetic. Howard didn't blink. And yet you agreed to be on it. That says something about where you are in your career. The door slammed behind her. The studio sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Robin whispered, "That was a disaster." Howard sank back into his chair with an exhausted sigh. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize. We brought Meghan Markle on to have a real conversation. She brought a list of demands and an attitude. You saw what happened. He exhaled slowly. Here's what I'll say. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've interviewed people who've survived wars, lost children, faced real persecution. Most of them managed to engage with difficult questions without treating them as personal attacks. What happened today wasn't about my questions. It was about her inability to handle questions at all. Robin shook her head. I've never seen anything quite like that. I have. I've seen people so convinced of their own narrative that they can't engage with anyone who questions it. But I've never seen it from someone who claims to want honest conversation while refusing to have one. Howard looked directly into the microphone. She's welcome back anytime, genuinely. If she wants to have an actual dialogue, I'm here. But if she comes back expecting me to accept her framing without examination, she'll be disappointed again. That's not what I do. I ask questions, and I comment on the answers. That's the job. He paused. We'll be back after these messages with someone who actually wants to talk. The footage went viral within hours. Every clip, every exchange, every devastating observation Howard made. The moments that got replayed most were predictable. That's not conversation, that's choreography. Your vision of being paid millions while producing almost nothing didn't align with their vision of receiving content. I can see how that might create tension. Happy people don't get angry when asked about their lives. The common factor is you. You're literally walking toward the door. Thanks for confirming everything I've ever said about you. Meghan's team released a statement calling the interview hostile, unprofessional, and predetermined. Howard addressed it the next day. I've seen the statement. Apparently asking someone about their publicly discussed projects and relationships is hostile. Apparently not accepting deflection is unprofessional. I've been called worse by better. And I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between hostility and honesty. Robin added, she came in expecting worship. She got questions. The gap between those two things is what we witnessed. Howard nodded. Here's my final thought. I feel for her. I really do. She's clearly struggling with something. The pressure, the scrutiny, the gap between how she sees herself and how the world sees her. That's hard. I acknowledge that. He paused. But hard doesn't mean immune from questions. Hard doesn't mean exempt from accountability. And hard definitely doesn't mean you get to storm out of interviews when they don't go your way. That's not courage. That's avoidance. And avoidance has a way of following you wherever you run. The interview lasted 28 minutes before Meghan walked out. Its impact would last considerably longer. For Howard Stern, it was another demonstration of what he'd always known. That real conversation requires willingness from both sides, and that control is what frightened people seek when honesty feels too dangerous. For Meghan Markle, it was something else. Proof that her media strategy didn't work on everyone. Evidence that some interviewers couldn't be managed, no matter how many pages of restrictions were sent in advance. Some rooms you can control, others control you. And Howard Stern's studio had been exposing the gap between image and reality for 4 decades. It wasn't about to stop for a duchess. What do you think? Was Howard too harsh? Or did Meghan deserve every question? Who would you want to see in that chair next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video to help it reach more people. Subscribe to our channel for more explosive celebrity moments.